Hello and good evening and welcome to March's edition of Historic Presentation Night here at the museum. My name is Becca and I'm the coordinator of this program and also the membership manager here. So I'd like to welcome you here. Just a few announcements before we get started tonight. If you're on our e-blast list, you should have gotten an email letting you know that we have a membership swap going on right now with the Cranbrook Institute of Science. They're out in Bloomfield Hills. So if you have your membership card and you want to go check out a really neat natural history museum, I recommend going out there and you can get in for free during the month of March. Their members can get in for free here as well. The museum's 7th annual Bombers, Berries, and Brews event is happening a month from today. It'll be on that Saturday night, April 5th. We welcome you to come out. Tickets are on sale on the website. It'll be a lot of fun and that will be happening right here at the museum building. And the last big thing on our calendar for the middle of the summer is Thunder Over Michigan. So this year it's going to be happening in mid-June this year, so it's a little earlier than it has been in previous years. It'll be June 20th through 22nd right here at Willow Run. We have tickets on sale on the website and members can get a discount too, so you can get that and redeem that. For those of you who don't know, we have historic presentation nights on the first Wednesday evening of each month at 7:30. We have information about these events on the online calendar, and I'm working on posting speaker events for later on this year on the website. So there's the stuff up for next month, but I'll start populating the rest of the year on there soon. And lastly, before I introduce tonight's speaker, our volunteer coordinator did want me to let you guys know that we are in need of volunteer mechanics in the Aeronautics Center. So if you have any experience or no experience at all, they would really appreciate your help, and we have Tom's business card in the gift shop if you'd like to reach out to him to learn more. I'd like to ask if everybody could silence their phones, and I'd like to welcome Kirk to the podium for our evening's presentation. So, thank you.
The applause were for you now. All right, let's test it out. Hey, all right, yay. That's Orville as an older man. 57, let's be real. But that's roughly the age he was when this whole feud was going on. I didn't want to put a young picture of him and stuff like that. I wanted to show you basically where he was in his life when this all happened. This picture up here is a famous picture if you're not familiar with it. This is the failure of Langley's Aerodome. The Aerodome is going to be a key part of this talk tonight. It was a houseboat launch, launched off our houseboat. The pilot, after this, quit. He didn't want to do it anymore because he kept crashing. This is the second and last time the attempt on the Aerodome was done. Yes. I have a slow fade, so it's like, is it, yes. All right. As Becca told us already, yeah, my name is Kirk Haas. I am a Wrights scholar, meaning I continue my research on the Wright brothers in my off time. I have been a Wright scholar roughly about 18 years now. I have written a book. I do have it on sale over there in the corner. We'll do that after the show if you're interested in that. But I am a master historical presenter at Greenfield Village. And my forte are the Wright buildings, the Wright cycle shop where the airplane was made, and the home where Orville and Catherine were born, where Wilbur and Mom pass away. I think this year, Wednesday I'm in the cycle shop, and Sunday I'm in the home. So if you have a question that you think of, come on out to Greenfield Village and track me down. And don't worry, all the other presenters send all the questions. Go talk to Kirk. He's in the cycle shop right now. It's all right. We do it to Chuck here with a Webster. Yeah, you got a Webster question? Go find Chuck. Okay. Before I start, I do want to thank my two mentors, Pat Minoski and Dale Whitford. Pat was a presenter and a Wright scholar at Greenfield Village, and she mentored me in the Wright brothers, got me hooked on that. Dale Whitford was a 40-year aeronautical engineer with the U.S. government on contract, and after he retired, he got fascinated by the Wright brothers, and then he wrote a book, Gateway to Flight, the reasons that the Wright brothers flew. And I got to meet him late in his life, and I went down to his house in Dayton to spend the weekend with him, and he took me on a private tour of Dayton, Ohio, to all the Wright brothers sites. And as we're going through the Air Force Museum, we get to this one fighter in the whole bit, and where he says, roll me over. He is in a wheelchair. Roll me over. And he points up and goes, see that windshield? That's my work. I had to determine what the thickness and what is the... I'm like, all right, Dale, you got me. You got me. Okay, so. Here we go. Okay, so here's the thing. Simply put, this gentleman right here, Charles Walcott, convinced the U.S. government to give Professor Samuel P. Langley $50,000. Now, $50,000 at the turn of the century is millions of dollars. And he convinced them to give Langley the money so that he could make a flying machine. The government wanted one. And so they, Walcott convinced them that Langley was the person to do it. Langley failed to do that. He actually borrowed another $20,000 for his launch boat. And it failed. And the press was invited to see it. And when it failed, the press proceeded to shame Langley to the point where Langley, it hurt his feelings for the rest of his life. He was near the end of his life anyways. But for that short amount of time, he held that it would have flown if only I, and but it didn't fly. Well, Walcott wanted to save his reputation with the U.S. government, but he also wanted to save his boss's reputation. Langley was the director of the Smithsonian at the time, and Walcott was his assistant. And so Walcott wanted, but the only way he could save Langley was to shame the Wright brothers as posers, as not really having done that. And that's the feud that happened. So Walcott is trying to save his reputation and Langley's. Orville is trying to hang on to the truth. He's trying to make sure that the truth gets out there and not what the Smithsonian and Walcott are telling you, because the Wrights are the first to fly. And it upset Orville that Walcott is telling them, no, Langley was the first to fly. And that's what we'll be talking about in here. Langley was not the first to fly. Don't let Walcott talk you into that. Now, this story is basically three parts. First part, I have a pointer. First part is 03. It's they succeed in flight. From 1914 to 1942, that is the argument. That is the feud between Walcott and Orville, stating that Langley's plane could have flown. And I'll tell you why it got to that. Eventually the Smithsonian will give in, and they will admit their error, and they will state the truth. And then after 45 years, the airplane is deposited in the National Museum. Today it's the Air and Space Museum. They have a whole room of their own. And if you were here earlier, you might have heard the story about Chuck, Bill, and I, and Joe, our friend Joe, going to the Smithsonian. And in the Wright room, just like in Kitty Hawk, we're walking around and we're going, oh, do you see this? Oh my God, wait, this, oh yeah, well, yeah. And then somebody else would be looking at an artifact and say, would you like to do a story about that artifact? And we're presenting at the Smithsonian, and it's like, oh my God, we got caught. Okay, they didn't get caught, I got caught. I can tell you that story later. So that basically is where we're going to go with today. Now, the first time the Wright brothers are interested in flight is that toy helicopter that their dad brings home He was a traveling minister, itinerant minister, and he brought home books and toys to stimulate the imaginations of his children. One day he brought home a toy helicopter, two propellers on a stick connected by a rubber band, twisted in opposite, let it go and it flies. And that fascinated the boys. They were in Cedar Rapids at the time, not Dayton. Dad got transferred for a short period of time. Their first adult interest in flight comes in 1896. Orville had typhoid. Wilbur sitting by his bedside reading. One of his favorite magazines to read was Scientific American, and he's reading about all these people who are attempting to fly. And yes, I have their names. Give me a moment here. He's reading about people like Pilcher, Pierce, Phillips, Santos Dumont, Maxim Chanute, Ader, Otto Lilienthal, and Sir George Cayley. And he is fascinated that all of these people are trying to fly. It's not a fluke if all these scientists are actually attempting to do it. So there must be something going on there. And then it culminated with Lilienthal's death. Wilbur reads about it and said he was so close, why don't we continue? And then when Orville gets better, he sits down with Orville and they agree, yeah, this would be fun. And then the first contact with the Smithsonian, this is a story about the Smithsonian, was on May 30th of 1899. Wilbur sits down and writes a letter and says, I'm not a crank, I think I can do this, and if I can't, at least I can advance it for the next person. And so the Smithsonian, not paying real close attention to what they're doing, an assistant of Langley's, sends Wilbur a stack of pamphlets, all the pamphlets they had on attempts to fly, and a list of 6 books to buy and read. And the boys absolutely devour that information. Within 2 weeks, they have read, I think, a couple of books and all of the pamphlets. And the two of them sat down and said, well, you know why nobody can fly for 50 years, these past 50 years? It's because they can't balance in the air. They have no way, they can get up, they can move forward, but they drift and crash. Pierce in New Zealand had a tri-wheeled, winged with a motor, and it would lift off, and it would travel, and it would drift, and then it would crash in the bush. They nicknamed him something like the crazy bushman or something like that, because he kept crashing in the bushes. And so all of these people are trying to do it. So after 2 weeks of reading that information, they sit down and say, well, it's balance. And they go, well, you know how you get balance is you get lift on one side at a time. And so in order to do that, Orville, who's the gadget guy, Wilbur's the brain, Orville's the gadget guy, he said, well, let's take a wing, cut it in half, and just twist the wing. We'll put a shaft in there, and we'll connect it to some gears and chain, and we'll be able to, that's how we'll be able to do it. And Wilbur's like, you know how heavy that's going to be? They'll never get off the air. You're crazy. And so Wilbur is standing in his bicycle shop one day talking to a customer, got a little box and twisting the box, and he realizes, oh no, you don't have to twist the whole wing. Just tip the edge and it'll trigger. So you just, a little bit, trigger. And so they said, okay, so we have that figured out. That's the secret, triggering the wing. How do we do that? They make a kite and they go fly that kite in the field behind their dad's church. And it works. They have discovered and tested the secret of flight. Now, he wrote the letter on May 30th. He flew the kite at the end of July. They had figured it out and proven it in 2 months. These guys did it in 2 months. 50 years, nobody could do it. They do it in 2 months. Takes them 6 years, 4 to 6 years to make a machine that'll carry it, to do the whole thing. But they had already figured out the secret in that short period of time. Now, did I just not move it? Yes, I forgot to move it. Okay. Here we go. All right, so here's the thing. This feud with the Smithsonian is not Orville and Langley. Orville and Wilbur loved Langley. They thought he was an incredible scientist. He was very helpful to so many people, and in the field of aviation, they really liked him because him believing it, the scientist that he was, him believing that it's possible, gave the Wrights the motivation to try. these people, I just listed off all these names, they were trying to fly. Well, the Wright brothers are looking at it going, well, they're not crazy. Obviously, if all these people around the world are trying to do it, there must be something there. So it was Langley who helped them. The Smithsonian was instrumental in, did I just skip over that? Yes. Technology, not my forte. Is it going to do it again? Okay. Okay. Woo! So here's the thing. Wilbur said that it's the Smithsonian who sent us all the information to get us started. Why would we be mad at them? No, they helped us. This is not against the Smithsonian. This is not against Langley. What this is against is Walcott, the guy I showed you in the beginning. He's the one who triggers all of this. And the Wright brothers made sure that, as you can see, they made sure everyone knew. No, Smithsonian and Langley, no. We think they're wonderful people. But the one person that made all the difference for them is Lilienthal. Lilienthal had been flying for half a dozen years, gliding, off of man-made hills. And the important thing about Lilienthal is that he wrote down all of his findings. He created charts of, if you have this shape, you're going to get this. If you do this, he comes up with a formula to figure out how the shape of the wing should be, and he uses all these things and stuff like that. And everybody across the globe is following Lilienthal because he is the preeminent glider of the time. He dies in 1896. His sister said, his last words were, "Sacrifices must be made." I do have that translated on my phone into German, but I'm not going to pull it up. Now, artifact number 1 to prove flight. The most famous aviation picture ever taken. This photograph captured the very moment that the first airplane lifted off the face of the earth. And the crack on the bottom there is there was damage to the box carrying all of their photos plates, and all of the photos in that box are cracked in that corner there. So when you see this picture, you usually just see this part right here, right there. But there's something in that that is so cool. In order for the airplane to go down the, go down the rail during liftoff, it's going to teeter on that rail. That rail is a 2x4 on edge, and so that big airplane is going to teeter. So one of them has to run alongside, keeping it level till it gets in the air. Then the pilot takes over. That's their invention that they create, is the ability to do that. Well, we get to see Wilbur's footprints in the sand as he's running alongside, and then a big gap. And there. He's not running with the airplane. He's actually stepping back out of the way. That spot right there is where he let go. That is the very moment that the very first airplane lifted off the face of the earth. And we caught it in a photograph. John T. Daniels, member of the life-saving station, squeezed the ball. When he was asked how it came out, he said, "I was so excited, I don't know if I squeezed the ball." It took him 5 days to go home and to find out that they actually had that picture of very first flight. But there isn't anyone out there, all the controversies, all the people out there, whether it's Whitehead or Curtis or any of these people trying to fly, none of them have a picture of their flight. The Jane's Magazine controversy with Gustav Whitehead was error. They were supposing, they found a blurred picture of a Whitehead glider, and they said that it showed him flying on that glider, and it didn't. It didn't at all. But Jane's Magazine ran with it. all of a sudden the state of Connecticut is honoring Gustav Whitehead on first flight day and stuff like that. And the guys and I, when we're in the cycle shop in Greenfield Village, we have to contend with those people all the time. It's like, no, show us the photograph. Show us the photograph. Whitehead did not fly. The two men he bribed to say he did reneged later on. You don't hear that part of it. All right, so 1903 they fly. Success. Do they stop? No. They go to Hoffman Prairie. They continue to fly. They continue to improve it. They're not going to give up now because they know they were the first to fly. And if they can make it practical, they can sell it. And so they get a patent. They patent it. So that way they're covered. Should anybody challenge them. Here's a picture from 1904, Hoffman Prairie, about 8 miles outside of Dayton. It was a corn pasture, a cow pasture, and Mr. Hoffman, not the Hoffman bikes and sewing machines, another Hoffman. He said, yeah, you can use the field, just scare off the cows first. I don't want them not being able to milk later on. So they did, but they continued to fly. But here, something happens on July 24th, 1904. It's kind of hard to see, but here's the outline. There's the rudder up in the air. There's the wings across the floor, ground. It is nose down, okay? Orville is on that. I think this is Wilbur, I'm not sure. It might be Charlie, it might be one of the other guys that were helping, but I think it is Wilbur. But this accident is what created the first practical airplane. You see, what was happening is that if you're familiar with the Wright Flyer, you have your wings, then you have an elevator in the front for up and down, then you have the rudder in the back to prevent fishtailing, right? Okay? They were really close, and so it undulated all the time. It was so hard to use. This crash, they realized, wait a minute, no, the rudder and the elevator have to be pulled away from the wing. Stretch it out. That'll give you more, an easier, more stable type flying. And so they did that. That accident right there is what caused the first practical airplane to be created. And now they make a new one. So the 05 Flyer is actually the late 04 Flyer, but we identify it as 05. On September 20th, later that year, the Wright brothers, Wilbur, flies the first circle in an airplane. He takes off, flies around, and then he comes back and lands close to where he took off. Why is this important? Why is this piece of paper here in their diary, in their collection of facts, so important? A.I. Root. He wrote Gleanings in Bee Culture, a magazine for farmers. And he was invited out to witness them fly the airplane. And he was there on that date. It's not the only date he was there. Another date that he had trouble flying, so he came back. But when it comes to proving that you flew first, if you have someone who was there and who publicized an article a couple of months later stating what he saw and what it was like and stuff like that, you've got some evidence there. You've got a witness you can go to saying, did you see it? The others do not. Whitehead paid those guys to say it, and they reneged. They were not happy with him. So if you're going to bribe somebody, pay. Okay, so this is one of my favorite photographs from 1905. It is the first flight on 1905 with the first practical airplane. You can see it right there. I believe it's Wilbur with Orville chasing him right here. You can see him chase because he had to hold the wing up. And I'm not sure who that is. Might be Charlie, but I kind of think Charlie was left at the cycle shop to keep working. So they did have other people. And one of the reasons they had other people is this. My apologies, folks, again. I'm old and technology is hard. That's why we give it to them when they're born. Here we go. Okay, this derrick over here what it was is there was a stone, okay, and it was rigged by a wire to go on the track to the front of it, so that when the rock fell, it would throw the airplane up. It would throw it up, and that way. Their engine wasn't strong enough to lift off in the calm winds of Dayton, so they came up with a way to slingshot it into the air. Some people say that means it's not an airplane, and I say, so explain that to the people who work on an aircraft carrier. But I do want to take a moment, am I wasting my time here? I do want to take a moment here to tell a cute little story about that derrick today. It's not the original derrick, it's not even the original shed. Hoffman Prairie and the National Park Service have recreated them on the spot, so it could be a museum setting. But Dale Whitford took me on a tour of Hoffman Prairie, walked me around, showed me this happened here, this happened there, this happened here. And I started a tradition, and I started to walk out to the middle of Hoffman Prairie and just stand there and absorb it. That's my Wright scholar, that's my emotional moment. And so I was out in the middle of the field, and I looked over, and Dale, who's close to 90 at this point, he is leaning over that cylinder, that rock. He's just leaning over. And from my distance, I thought he had a heart attack. And so I'm running there. I'm like, oh my God, Dale, are you okay? Are you okay? And he lifts his head and he goes, I can't remember the density of concrete. I knew right there I was in the presence of greatness. And it's like, oh my God. And so he's trying to bring you, he's like, well, this is 18 inches and this is 24 inches, 36. So it's got to be roughly about 50, maybe 1,600 pounds. And I'm like, oh my God, Dale, I thought you were dying. So I walked away just because I wanted to hit him. I walk over to this big sign on Hoffman Prairie, and there it says, a 1,600-pound weight. And I'm like, Dale, you got it right. Good for you, good for you. All right, I digress there. I love Dale. And he was such a wonderful man to me. Absolutely wonderful man. Okay, so that's 05, okay? So at the end of 05, they realize they have a practical machine, they stop experimenting, they start marketing. And one of the reasons they can market it is because on May 22nd, 1906, they received the patent. This patent was considered to be the grandfather patent of all of aviation, and there is a reason for that, and that is even today, even though this patent is no longer in effect, it is impossible to fly an airplane today. We're in an airplane museum. It is impossible to fly an airplane today without using the technology that is in that patent. That's why they were given the grandfather patent of all of aviations. Now, if that patent was submitted today, it would have been rejected. It's too broad. It's not specific enough. Curtis got in a big argument, that's part of this story here, about saying that, no, it's too broad. It's a you can't patent a concept. You have to patent the device to be able to achieve the concept. And so, but that right there, that is what gave them the right to collect royalties on any airplane made anywhere in the world up until they sell the company. Now, part two. This is the other side of the story. This is Langley. This is this is where the beginning of the end of this whole little thing gets convoluted, you might say. These three gentlemen right here are directors for the Smithsonian. Langley is the director at the time this event takes place. When he passes away, I think it's 06, when he passes away, Walcott takes over. Walcott was his first right-hand man, and as I told you earlier, he's the one who tried to save Langley's reputation. The gentleman below, Charles Abbott, he replaces Walcott when Walcott dies. It will fall upon Abbott to fix the feud that I'm about to explain. So, here's our picture again. The great failure of Langley. And I say failure because he quit. He stopped after this. He didn't continue on. The shaming in the newspapers was tremendous and cruel and ridiculous. The Wright brothers did not believe that he should have been shamed like that at all. He was trying to do something. He believed in something the Wright brothers believed in. And to be shamed like that by the newspaper, saying what a ridiculous old man trying to do something that is impossible. And he didn't continue on. He stopped after that. Where am I? All right. Good old 1910. In 1910, Walcott, taking over for Langley, writes to the Wright brothers, and he says, the National Museum is endeavoring to enlarge its collection, illustrating the progress of aviation. Words are key in this, progress of aviation. What Walcott did is he wrote to Wilbur and said, we'd like an artifact to put in our museum to discuss the progress of aviation. The things that he requested were, read that, a quarter-size model of the 1908 Flyer. The 1908 Flyer is the flyer that Orville used in Fort Myer, Virginia, to sell the airplane to the U.S. government. It did crash, and he had to return the following year because Orville was injured in that crash. But they like a quarter-size model of that 08 Flyer. And they said if the 03 is different, they'd like a quarter-size model of the 03 Flyer. The key word is there, like size. Quarter size. Not full size, but same size, okay? And then they would like a reconstruction of the airplane if they could possibly get it. Now here's the thing. If, however, the Wright brothers think that Kitty Hawk machine would answer the purpose better, their judgment might decide the question. And then any earlier engine. The Smithsonian was trying to give the Wright brothers credit for the engine, not the airplane. They wanted to give that to Langley. The engine, though, they wanted to give it to the Wright brothers. Well, here's the thing. That letter was the last time that the Smithsonian spoke with Wilbur Wright, because Wilbur sat down with Orville, and they said, do you realize that if they put a quarter-size model of our 03 Flyer next to a full-size model of his 03 Aerodome, people are going to think his was the first, and theirs would not be considered first, and would jeopardize their legacy. So they just stopped talking to them. They thought, oh, they're trying to snow us here. No, we're not going to do this. We'll sit back. We've got time to take care of this. Part of the problem is that Wilbur died in 2 years. He never got to see that airplane on display anywhere. He had passed away. In 1914, this is 2 years after Wilbur has passed away, Curtis loses a patent infringement fight. He had been fighting with the Wright brothers for almost a decade about first flight. He felt slighted that he wasn't allowed to give them an engine and stuff like, that's a whole story. But the thing is that he got really upset about losing every single patent infringement fight that he had. Because Curtis kept going to court, trying to not pay royalties on that patent, Wilbur spent the last 2 years of his life in court repeating over and over and over how they invented the airplane. He had all the goods. He had documents, he had pictures, he had explanations. Not a single person out there could say how they figured it out. And Curtis actually had to admit that, well, he he figured it out after Wilbur told everybody. In 1901, he gave a speech at the Western Society of Engineers saying, this is how you do it. Well, nobody believed him because, you know, who's this guy coming in here from Dayton, Ohio, blah, 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 blah. They didn't know about the Michigan, Ohio thing. But anyways, but the thing is that he kept going to court and refusing to pay the royalties. And that exhausted Wilbur. And after his Boston thing in 1912, he returned home and he had caught typhoid fever. And he died 2 weeks after getting home. So he dies at the age of 45 after fighting for 2 years for their legacy. And he never sees the success of that fight. Orville blamed Curtis for exhausting Wilbur and making him susceptible and then dying. So Orville held that against Curtis for the rest of his life. What Curtis wanted to do is he wanted to prove that if somebody could have flown before the Wright brothers, that patent would be null and void. This is what he was trying to do. And what he does is he talks the Smithsonian into loaning to him the remaining parts of Langley's Aerodome so that Curtis could take it to Hammondsport, rebuild it, and then make it fly to prove Langley's plane could have flown. What he wanted to do was throw out so much confusion out there, and successfully he did do that, to the point where he takes those parts, takes them to Hammondsport. I'm going to jump a little bit. He alters it, and then he sends it back to the Smithsonian, and the Smithsonian puts a sign on it saying it flew unaltered because it had been returned back to the 03 shape that it was in. And that's what incensed Orville. No, that the first one didn't fly. It didn't fly twice. We have photographs. We have newspaper reports. It did not fly. How can you now say that it could have? And why would you think that something that could have would trump something that did? That didn't make sense. And that was bothering him very, very much. Now, when he takes the Aerodome and he rebuilds it, Griffith Brewer, you might not have heard this guy right here, Griffith Brewer. He is the president of the British Aero Club. He is the first Englishman to fly in an airplane with Wilbur. It was in France. He went down there and got a flight, and then became the president, and very good friends with the Wrights for the remainder of his life, or their life. And he discovers that Curtis is using Wright technology to alter the Aerodome. It didn't fly without Wright technology, but now it's going to fly with technology. So what happens is that Griffith and Loren Wright, the Wright brothers' brother, older brother, okay, they go down to take pictures of the rebuilding of the Aerodome. While they're down there, the security sees them spying, and they approach them, and they go to Loren, and they take his camera, and they rip out the film, kick them out. Well, it just so happens that Griffith was holding his camera behind his back, and he kept his photographs. And so their little attempt to stop them failed. Loren was active with the Wright brothers, not in the inventing process, but in the afterwards of trying to help them retain their legacy. No one's going to step on his brothers like they were doing there. Here are some photos that Griffith took, and you can see right off the bat they're failing. Okay, they're not doing real well here. They have to discuss, okay, what do we do with the tail? The tail didn't work, okay? And so you can see he's got some detailed photographs to work with there. And so Griffith and Loren returned back to Orville and explained it to him. Look at the photos. Look at what they're doing. Look at what this has happened. Orville just exploded that they were doing this and they were going to steal he and his brother's legacy. He was so angry with all of that. Now Griffith took it upon himself to champion for the Wright brothers. He was not happy that Curtiss was getting away with this. Let me be clear, okay? Let me be clear. Curtiss made a better airplane than the Wright brothers. We don't celebrate the Wright brothers for making the best airplane. We celebrate them for making the first airplane. And Curtiss made a better airplane. He just didn't want to pay the royalty. He didn't want to pay the royalty because he knew he was going to sell a lot of planes. Well, the quote down on the bottom here is from this letter that Griffith wrote to Orville. And this is quite telling here. Again, after the fact proof of what was going on. And it says, it does not seem 28 years ago since I went to Hammondsport and saw the Smithsonian fraud in the making, and that 20 years have gone by since I read my paper on the Langley machine and the Hammondsport's trial. Now, the thing is that Griffith knew this was wrong. He was a friend of Orville. He championed for them for many years, and was crucial in convincing Orville what to do with that airplane. I'm going to run you through some other pictures here of Hammondsport. Now, the plane that they made, the Aerodome that they made, did fly. We actually call them dolphin leaps. It went up in the air, forward, down, up in the air, forward, down. So it did get off, it did lift off, and it did travel forward in controlled flight. So in that regard, but it could not sustain any level of flight. Here's a picture of it taking off. And again, after it's gone by, the backside. Now, that aerodrome was sent back to the Smithsonian. It went on display, and there was a sign that was placed on it that said, this airplane is the first airplane capable of human flight. And when Orville learned that, he contacted them and said, change that sign. That it's not true, you're lying to the people, please fix it. And they said no. So Orville went on a campaign to tell the world the truth. And he took his airplane on 5 different places, rebuilt it, and put it on display, and stood there and talked about it to anybody who wanted to know. So you see, he does put it back together again, but not until 1916. At one of the, I think it was the first one, Orville was displaying at MIT, and Alexander Graham Bell, who was a member of the Smithsonian, he approached Orville and said, why isn't this airplane in the Smithsonian? And Orville said, because they don't want it. You see, he's referring back to that letter written saying, we don't want the airplane, we want a small model of it so that we can talk about it. And not actually tell the truth. And Bell was upset. So he contacts Walcott again and says, go get that airplane. And so Walcott invites Orville in to, he invites him in to talk with Walcott again, and he left there going, nope, they don't want this airplane. They want us to prove, they want our airplane to prove that Langley flew first, because ours was December, his was September. And they're it's like, this is very wrong, and Orville, I don't even know where I'm going with that. All right, this is a cool picture, okay? So this is the New York exhibit that he's displaying the airplane. And one really cool thing is here's Orville right there, and there's Glenn Martin. If you know Wright Brothers history, you know that Glenn Martin is the man that bought the Wright Airplane Company That's not the title of the company, but he bought it. When Orville sold the company in 1915 after Wilbur dies, he sells it to a conglomerate of very wealthy gentlemen. They take over for Orville, and then they sell it to Glenn Martin. You might have heard of Lockheed Martin or Martin Marietta. You might have heard of these things. There's your man right there. He's actually, Glenn is actually talking to Orville after Glenn has sold the company. And he sold the company, do I have a picture for that? No, it's the next slide though. Glenn Martin's company what happened was that he bought the company and then he divested out of it within a year because he didn't like having a board of directors. He wanted to have control. Board of directors wouldn't let him do it, so he divested himself and got out of his own company. And the funny thing, though, is that the Curtis Company and the Wright Company joined together in 1929. But Orville and Glenn Curtis are not in those companies anymore. They're gone. They're former directors. They're not involved in it anymore. Otherwise, it would never have happened. Now, the reason that it's the Curtis Wright Corporation today, and not just the Curtis Corporation, is because part of the purchase of the Wright brothers airplane company was that the name Wright had to remain in the title of the company. How you did it, that was up to you for that. Where are we on this? All right, so in 1925, Griffith Brewer, obviously a Brit, he tells Orville, okay, so they're not changing the sign, they're not telling the truth, we need to shame the Smithsonian. And so what Griffith does is talks Orville into giving the airplane to the Kensington Science Museum in London so that it could be displayed on foreign soil, to shame the American museum into not having America's greatest invention. It actually went to England. You know, screw you guys. And so this is Orville's quote explaining why that he sent it there. It did stay on display at the Kensington Science Museum for 20 years. Here is a picture of it on display there. Now, in 1935, I'm going to have to get this out here. So I got a list I got to read. Here we go. In 1935, the senior editor of the Detroit News newspaper, William Scripps, you've heard of Scripps Broadcasting. Well, William Scripps is the son of that William Scripps Broadcasting gentleman. He was the senior editor of the Detroit News newspaper, and he was a friend of Ford, and he was also the president of a club of pilots called the Early Birds. You had to have flown before December 17th, 1916 in order to be a member of that, because you would be considered a pioneer of aviation. Well, having an end date for joining a club means that eventually all of your members die. And that's what happened. So in 1935, Scripps approaches Edsel, and then Henry Ford, about bringing the cycle shop, approaching them saying, we have a collection of artifacts that the early birds do, planes, instruments, clothing, stories, and we need a home because we're going to die, we don't know what to do with it. Yeah. And so Edsel and Scripps convince Henry to take all of that artifacts, and that's where their Heroes of the Sky exhibit in the museum comes from. It's the early birds. Well, in that process, Scripps asked Henry, well, we can't get the airplane, it's in England, would you be willing to bring the cycle shop to Greenfield Village to honor what they did? And Ford said no. And Scripps says, why? And Ford says, well, because Orville's alive. Maybe you should get his permission first. And so he does, and so the building actually does end up in Greenfield Village. But this document that I'm about to show you right here is fascinating. James Pearsall was the aviation editor of the Detroit News, and he was sent by Scripps down to Dayton, Ohio to sit down with Orville and say, what's going on? Why isn't that airplane in the National Museum? What is going on here? We need to fix this. Something needs to be done. And Orville starts out saying, this is the hardest thing for me to talk about because it's very emotional and I don't like talking about it. But Orville, a very shy person, does not talk to strangers, talked for 2.5 hours straight. Pearsall could barely interject. Orville opened up and just spilled his entire heart about how horrible this event at the Smithsonian was that they're doing to his brother and he. And Pearsall says, that's exactly why we want to step in here. We want you to know. Everybody out there knows you flew first. We want to fix that. And we want to make it right. And would you be willing to let us take the cycle shop to Greenfield Village? And that is the basis of how that gets there. Now, 3 years later, in 1938, there were 5 American museums that were that wanted to have the flyer in their museum. Those museums are Smithsonian, Franklin Institute, Chicago Museum of Industrial Arts, the Air Corps Museum at Wright Field in Dayton, that would be the Air Force Museum today, and the Edison Institute, that's the Henry Ford, that's the original name of the Henry Ford. So there was an outcry for Orville to bring the airplane back. These museums were trying to convince him to do that. Scripps convinces him to bring the buildings, but he does not convince him to bring the airplane. So, after that meeting, it's successful. The airplane, the cycle shop, and the home are brought to Greenfield Village. It's funny, Scripps took Orville for a walk when they were down inspecting the cycle shop and said, didn't you grow up in the neighborhood? He said, yeah, the old house is around the corner. So they walked over and Scripps said, do you think Henry Ford would want this also? It's your birthplace. And Orville says, oh, it's an old-fashioned building. It would mar the landscape of Greenfield Village. Well, when Henry Ford was told that, he got his checkbook out and says, give me that building, I'll turn it into a little gem, which is what he did. That is one of my favorite buildings in Greenfield Village today. Now, after the buildings move, I want to find my quote here. Okay, there was a group of people who were trying to get Orville and the Smithsonian to make peace. And I want to read the petition that they wrote. Now, therefore, the undersigned, in company with the Association of Men with Wings, petition you and your fellow members of the Board of Regents of our National Museum to order immediate change on all Smithsonian records of early heavier-than-air flight so that the contribution of the Wrights, as accepted by all other scientists and technicians of the world, may be described unquestioned to posterity, that and the original Wright craft can be returned to the country of its creation. See, what Orville had said after they publicized the fact that it was unaltered is he went to the Smithsonian and he said, you're lying and I want an apology. I want you to write down on a piece of paper that you apologize to me and my brother for putting us through this. And they wouldn't do it. All they had to do was apologize. They didn't do it. Well, in 1942, Abbott, after many negotiations with Orville, well, can we say this on the sign? Orville's like, no, it's the same thing. Can we say this? No, you're still not telling the truth. Can we say this? No. Eventually, it whittles down to a point where it's acceptable to Orville. But then Orville says, great, where's my apology? I want it in writing. So, what they had to do, they had written a book. These little magazines that they have here out of the Smithsonian, These are specific magazines on a specific topic and stuff like that. They publish them all the time. They still do, actually. But it was in this one right here, 1942, that that Abbott makes the correction, and he admits the errors of the former things to satisfy his request. Now, where are we? I'm sorry, I'm not as smooth as I probably should be on this. Part of that apology in that magazine is this: a list of all the alterations that Curtiss made to the aerodrome. There, how many do, I think there's 38. 38 changes, and many of them are Wright technology. What Orville requested is that you list what Curtiss did, and then you list what the Wright brothers did. So in other words, you compare them back and forth. This is what this is, the Wright brothers technology, stuff like that, and made them do that. Now, to make it easy on us, I've listed the changes. So, changes 1 through 15 are the wings: size, area, aspect ratio, camber, leading edge. Next, the rudder, steering. Yeah. This is a brand new airplane. This is not the Aerodome. This is new. This is all new stuff. 35, I guess it's 35. Not 38. But Orville wanted this listed so that the general public could draw their own conclusions. He wasn't saying, Smithsonian say you're wrong. He was saying, apologize to them, and then let them make the choice as to who, and let posterity determine whether we really are the successful ones or not. And here is the wonderful quote. I sincerely regret the public statement by officers of the institution that the tests of 1914 showed that the late Secretary Langley had succeeded in building the first airplane capable of sustained free flight with man. Orville said, good, it's about time. So, I think here's another version of that quote there. The flights of the Langley Aerodrome at Hemmingsport in 1914 did not warrant the statements published by the Smithsonian Institute that the large Langley machine of 1903 was capable of sustained flight carrying a man. So, Orville writes a letter, gives it to his secretary, says, store this. When it's time, we'll pull this letter out and we'll bring the airplane back. But we can't do it until the war's over, because if it gets caught by a U-boat or something like that, it would be destroyed. So what the British did is they took that airplane from the London Museum. They took it apart, crated it up, and buried it deep, deep below the museum to protect it from the bombs. That's why it was preserved through that entire time. Now, so, after Orville dies, his executors of his will approach his secretary, Mabel, and say, do you have the letter that did he write a letter bringing it back? She said, yes. And they said, well, can we see the letter? And she says, no. And they're like, why not? Because Orville didn't tell me to let you see it. She was a stickler. She protected that man to the nth degree. And so they had to go get a couple of lawyers and bring them in and sit Mabel down and say, you have to give the letter over. You have to do it. You can't keep it. And she's very reluctant, but she did do that. The interesting thing with Mabel is after Mabel passes away, the executors of her will are going through her possessions, and in a little hidey hole underneath the stairs, they discover a shoebox filled with love letters from Orville to Mabel. They were lovers. Orville had a significant other for the rest of his life, well, roughly about a 30-year period. Bless his heart. We all think of him as this shy little thing. No, he led a life, and he got to enjoy the aspects of that. He actually built her a house, and they would lunch there. And just leave it at that. I'm not going to go any deeper than that. So she does eventually give up the letter, and so now they do have to wait. Now is the waiting for the war to end so that they could actually do it. And then on the 45th anniversary of that first flight, that airplane is deposited and dedicated in the Smithsonian. Tragically though, Orville Wright does die in January of 1948. Kind of cute thing about his death is not cute, but one of the cute things about it was that Orville Wright died on January 30th of 1948, and Chuck Yeager breaks the sound barrier in October of 47. 3 months after Yeager breaks the sound barrier, Orville dies. He got to see that. Well, he didn't physically see it, but he was aware that it had happened. And I just think that that's just absolutely fascinating that Orville Wright lives through both world wars and then lives long enough to have the sound barrier broken. That's quite an accomplishment for him to do that. This is Orville's statement. Any one of a dozen men might have done as well as we did, or nearly as well, but many great men failed to discover the way. Our research is what counts. That means something. The courts have held that we are the pioneers. We are the pioneers. This letter was delivered to Fred Black. He was the director of Greenfield Village at the time, and he held on to those papers, and that letter that you just saw from Pearsall is available for public to display if you can get into the Benson Ford Research Center. It is hard to get in after COVID, so it might be difficult for you to do that. But it starts with a letter saying, we would like a facsimile of something that you might have done. And it ends with an apology to Orville Wright, saying, we're sorry, we didn't mean to take your legacy away from you. Orville fought the rest of his life to maintain the legacy that he and his brother had invented the first airplane. And you have to stop and think about it. You do something incredible, change the world, make the planet a smaller place to live with the ease of the airplane, and change so much, and then to have to spend the last 3 decades of your life arguing over whether you actually did it or not. When all the scientists, they're all saying the same thing. Oh no, the Wrights did it. And then the Smithsonian, the National Museum, comes in and says, oh, no, they didn't do that. That was Langley. He's one of ours. Well, how could they do that? It makes you stop and think, is the Smithsonian actually telling the truth? Well, they are. Let's be real. This all comes down to Walcott. He's trying to save the reputation of his boss and friend, Professor Langley. So in that regard, I can't fault him for starting it. What I can fault him for is not ending it. Letting it go until he dies, so that the next guy in Abbott has to be the one to sit down with Orville and say, oh my God, okay, what can we do? What can we do? I'm sorry this happened, what can we do? But Abbott has to go to the Board of Regents. He can't just write something. He's got to get approval and the whole thing. So when you go into the Wright room in the Air and Space Museum today, to the left is a huge plaque with a picture of the two boys, and then this giant statement about the fact that they truly are the inventors of the airplane. And that is what Orville stated, is that you have to tell the people that we were the pioneers, that we are the pioneers. And so that's where we are today. And of course, I have sources, I have things, you know, people always say, you know, you have to cite everything. I didn't want to cite every photo. Basically, this is where I got my information from. I do read a lot. I do go to Dayton with my scholar friends, and we discover things. We found the Wright brothers' father's church. We found the field where he flew the kite.
Chadwick Hill.
At Chadwick's Hill. Yeah, we found it. This place, there's no sign there or anything. Bill contacted a board member of Dayton and said, "Would you put a sign there?" And so in that regard. Now this is my League of Wright Scholars. These are my friends. You can see right here. There's Chuck and there's Bill. They're sitting right there. And this gentleman right here, and I do have to give him kudos. No, go back.
Gary.
There we go. I do want to point. I'm having trouble.
There we go.
Okay. I want to point out Gary Tisdale. Bless his heart. He has passed away. Gary and I were sitting on the bench waiting to swipe in for work one day, and Gary says, you know, people keep coming to us with these questions and stuff. Like, even presenters are asking us all these questions. Why don't we have a giant lunch, invite everybody, and they can ask us all these questions. We can sit there and answer them. We can talk the whole bit. That turned into the League of Wright Scholars, which is, this is the core group. This is the original group, where we invite our fellow presenters to a lunch every once in a while and answer their questions and make sure that we're all on the same page, telling the truth, that we know, and new information changes stories, and so we try to keep up with all of that there. Now, what I do want to point out, and just to toot my own horn, yes, I have written the right words, and I do have them on sale over there. I'll get over there afterwards, and if you do want to buy them, it is $10. It's only available on Amazon. If you don't want to buy it from me, go to Amazon and look it up. I got no qualms with that. It's a matter of, I figured out how I still get a royalty if I buy a large quantity so that I can sell it to you. So I finally figured out how to do that, but this is just one of the books out there about the Wright brothers. It's not a technical book. It's not going to tell you how to invent an airplane. And what it's going to do is it's going to tell you what was their mind, what were they thinking when they approached a problem and something that was a brick wall, how did they get around it? And it's a short little book. You'll read it in one sitting. And I do ask that if you don't like it, give it to a teacher, hand it to them, because these are wonderful essays for their students to look into. And last but not least, I want to say thank you to Becca and the Michigan Flight Museum, formerly the Yankee Air, and for inviting me here and for continuing to tell the stories of aviation. After last year's talk, I did donate a model of the Wright Flyer, built by Dale Whitford. I inherited it from his family when he passed away. And it is fragile, and I couldn't maintain it, so I donated it here. And it is flying in the ceiling as you walk in there. If you can take a look at it, that is Dale Whitford's work. After he retired, he went to the Smithsonian in order to take measurements and photos of the Wright Flyer so he could make a model. He was a modeler. And he ran into Paul Garber, at the time the director of the Air and Space Museum. Paul befriended him, took him out to lunch, took him upstairs, and gave him a copy of the original blueprints of the Wright Flyer that was made by the Smithsonian when they received it. So that is a very accurate recreation that's flying. It's about 5 feet wide, but you'll be able to see Dale's work. And I would appreciate it if you just stop and take a look at it and honor my friend. Thank you to Becca and all of your people here. I hope I didn't go over.
Oh, no, you are all good.
Okay, so in that regard, it's Q&A time. So if there's any questions,
rather than a question, an amazing coincidence is John Daniels died at 14 hours after Orville Wright.
oh, that's interesting. John Daniels is the guy who took the photograph of the first flight, and he just mentioned that he died right after Orville. That is amazing. Yes?
What's the current configuration that's hanging in the ceiling of the Aerodome that's over there in Hazy? Is it 1914 or 1903?
03, because it was reverted back in an attempt to convince people it was unaltered. You had a...
Yes, I read a book on them, I think called The Bishop's Boys.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they almost had a personality cult of privacy that maybe prevented them from having more publicity to promote the airplane. Can you comment on that? His father's breakaway sect of the church and...
Okay, so the schism in the United Brethren is not involved in the Wright brothers and their inventing. Wilbur does help Dad with the publicizing of that and the legal aspects of that. The personalities of the Wright brothers and their staying within themselves and not publicizing and stuff like that. Part of it is to protect their work and their intention. So their father taught them to be righteous, but to stand up and take credit, demand the credit. If you do it, you want to stick with that. So they are in that regard. As to their privacy, we're going to step into an area here. I'm going to be very brief. I don't want to get too deep into it. But there is an element of the fact that Wilbur and Orville perhaps were autistic. And they were so focused on their work on the airplanes, the discovery and the fascination that they were having with that, very scientific, they could focus in on that. That kept them very private and inside their thing. But they were in contact with Chanute all the time, daily, if not weekly, letters are between Wilbur and Chanute and stuff like that. So they are out there in the field. They're not publicly standing up and saying, hey, look at us, because that's not the way they were. They wanted credit, they wanted to get that, but they didn't want to show it out. Their ego was not such that they wanted to get the kudos. They actually did not like the kudos. They were very put off by these fair weather people who are now loving them and stuff in that regard. So that does help them to keep it secret. As to the 06 and why they're not showing it to people and the secrecy in that regard, because they had not received the patent yet. They were waiting for the patent. Once the patent's out, hey, sign the contract, we'll show it to you.
How old was Orville when he passed?
76 years old.
So there's an entire southern hemisphere where if you ask most people who invented the airplane, they say Santos Dumont.
Okay,
So-
Santos Dumont.
How do we fix that?
Okay, so first off, he's a Brazilian, and the Brazilians, they want to honor their own. They should. He was a very talented man. He was a very ingenious man. Santos Dumont deserves all the credit he can get, except he does not fly first. You see, when the Olympics were in Brazil, they said that Santos Dumont was the first to fly, which is true, but that's only half the sentence. He was the first to fly in Europe, not the first to fly anywhere.
He was the first to popularize, and this is to your point, Randy. He was very popular. He wanted all the attention.
Yes.
I would like to fix it today. So you're sort of on the forefront of this. What can we do?
To fix the Santos Dumont,
The Santos Dumont myth that they were the first to fly. There are a lot of people in the world. It's really all over the southern hemisphere, and there are still people in Europe who believe it because he did so much flying there. So how do we popularize the truth?
okay, so here's the thing. The truth doesn't need to be popularized. What we need to do is to help people understand that even though Santos Dumont is a very creative and very intelligent, very talented man, other people gave him credit for something he did not do. And all you can do is just explain to people that is the case. The Olympics screwed it up by saying that he was, and so now people, conspiracy theory. Same thing with Jane's Magazine and Gustav Whitehead. If Jane says it, it must be true. No, it wasn't true. I have another question. Yes?
Curtis ever pay his royalties?
No. Because what happened was that the,
Was
in 19...
whatever broken?
Was it, I'm sorry,
What
what?
was the question?
The question was, did Curtis ever pay the royalties? And the answer is no. Right before the United States enters into World War I, the US government buys the patent and makes it a licensing instead of a royalty. Whereas you put arbitrary number, you put $100 a year in, and you can make all the airplanes you want to make using Wright Brothers technology. In essence, null and voided that patent there, but it's still a licensing fee.
So was the Wright family then set for the rest of their lives based on that?
Okay, so the Wright brothers' family was set for the rest of their lives upon Wilbur's death. When Wilbur dies, he'd been selling airplanes for 3 years. His estate is established between $300,000 and $350,000 today. That's $7 to $9 million. He wills that money to his family members. They live off that money for the rest of their life. Catherine Wright, their sister, gets $50,000 in 1912. That's $1.3 million today. Overnight, she becomes one of the wealthiest women in Dayton, Ohio. Now, does she use that money to throw socialite parties, long trips, fancy clothes? No. Okay, she buys the clothes. We're going to give her that. No, but she does. She uses that money to champion causes. She organized the march, the suffragette march in Dayton, Ohio. So they went on to use that money for good causes and stuff, but they were set for life when Wilbur dies. Now, Orville lives a long time after that. He's living off the money he has. Wilbur and Orville had the same amount, in an equal amount, so Orville was fine. He was the other family members, yeah, they got some money along with this. His brother Richland refused the money, and Wilbur's dad stepped in and said, no, he wanted you to have it, you're taking it. So.
Plus, I wanted to add to that, Orville sells the company in about 1915.
October.
Yeah, and he gets a huge amount of money for that.
Yes, he does get a lot. So there's lots of money in the Wright family, all because of the airplane.
Where was Huffman Field in relation to the Wright Pats and the Air Force?
Wright Pat, right now. Wright Pat is this elongated Air Force base testing ground for fighters and stuff like that. And at the very end is Huffman Prairie. So it is considered part of Wright Pat, but it is at the very end and separated at the end of the day.
So it's near Wright
It's right.
Military.
No, it's right down the street from the Air Force Museum. Anybody else? So do you know everything you need to know about the Wright brothers?
Well, thank you so much, Kurt.
You're welcome.
Just a couple things before you head on home. Don't forget that we have wonderful presentations like this the first Wednesday of each month. Next month we'll be talking about something a little bit different. We have a certified consulting meteorologist, Rick Foltman, that will be coming, and he'll be talking about weather and aviation. So it's a slightly different topic that we typically have, but we're really excited to have him, and he's excited to share his knowledge about weather with us. Let's see here. Tickets for that program will be going on sale on the website tomorrow, so we have about a month or so until April 2nd with that program. One last thing, don't forget about the donation boxes that we have. We really appreciate all of your support, and we look forward to seeing you very soon. Thanks for coming.